Okay, so today we are interviewing Monte Piliawsky, a PhD graduate from Tulane University. He's an associate professor teaching education at Wayne State University, lead senior professor. Could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Well, first, I'm 82 years old right now, which I'm rather proud to say. I've taught at 10 colleges in the United States. I've given up tenure at 2 of them because I was trailing spouse. My ex-wife was dean of several law schools. I taught for 13 years at Dillard University, a historically black college in New Orleans. I've been at Wayne State University in Detroit, the current job, for 28 years. Before that, I was for 4 years Director of Educational Studies at a very elite liberal arts school in Hartford called Trinity College. In between Trinity and Wayne State, I taught in medium security prisons in Connecticut. So I've taught at almost all the various possible institutions of higher learning in America. My PhD is actually in political science from Tulane University in 1970. And I taught political science until 1995 when I shifted to educational studies. I published a lot in black politics for my first 25 years, particularly about the impact of black mayors on black communities. And in more recent years in education, I've taught about schools like school desegregation, and I directed an after-school tutoring program for 3 years in Detroit at Frank Cody High School, and wrote a lot about that experience and the impact on students.
So you were born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana?
Yeah, I was born in New Orleans and then moved to Hattiesburg, Mississippi for my first full-time job at University of Southern Mississippi. And then I moved to Kansas City, where I taught for 8 years. And then I moved to Hartford, taught at Trinity College, and I've been in Detroit since 1999.
How was it growing up in the 1950s?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, New Orleans was totally racially segregated, obviously. There had not been a single white student that hadn't been in anything but 100% white school, and likewise black students. I'll just give you one example about that. When I was to be a senior in high school in September of 1960, and the federal courts ordered that New Orleans schools had to desegregate, the state legislature voted with 2 dissenting votes to close down all the schools in New Orleans rather than let them desegregate. And so I had no place to go to high school for my senior year. Finally, the federal courts did intervene, and New Orleans schools desegregated with 3 African-American girls, including Ruby Bridges, going to 2 previously all-white schools, and race riots ensued in the city. So it was a very rough city in terms of racial segregation.
Yeah, many people across America, when they think of New Orleans, they think of Mardi Gras, party town. What is the history of Mardi Gras?
Well, these are Mardi Gras beads, which are the things that the revelers wear on the floats, and throw these and trinkets to the begging masses. The symbolism of it is kind of gross. It's a royalty throwing trinkets to the begging peasants. Mardi Gras actually is an important Roman Catholic holiday. It's the day before Ash Wednesday, which is the beginning of the Lenten season that ends in Easter 40 days later. And Mardi Gras as a festival began thousands of years ago by pagans who used it as a way to celebrate the warm weather of the spring. It's sort of fertility rites of spring. Mardi Gras as a celebration existed before Catholicism. The Romans and their empire had that period celebrated. When the Catholics arrived in Rome, they decided to maintain the Mardi Gras festival, not to interfere with it. So Mardi Gras is celebrated throughout the world in various countries that have Roman Catholic large populations, notably Brazil and Venice and now New Orleans. New Orleans Mardi Gras itself began the day New Orleans was settled, believe it or not. New Orleans was settled by French explorers, Bienville and d'Iberville, in 1699, and the spot that they landed between Mobile and New Orleans, they named Mardi Gras Point. Mardi Gras persisted in Louisiana as long as the French were in control. When Spain took over New Orleans in 1763, Mardi Gras was canceled. Mardi Gras came back when Louisiana became a state in 1812. And the first great Mardi Gras parade, which is continuous still to today, was in 1857, which was the Mystic Krewe of Comus. Krewe is K-R-E-W, the word that we use for a Mardi Gras organization.
So the custom of throwing beads from the top down to the people at the bottom is the brouage.
That's exactly right, and people don't recognize that probably, but it's the royalty, it's the kings and queens on the top of the parade floats that again throw these trinkets, beads, and other things to the peasants, to the begging masses. So the symbolism of it is pretty bad. People spend a lot of money to be in these exclusive Mardi Gras organizations and buy tens of thousands of dollars of stuff to toss out. So it's high society that has created Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras has been all white except for one black parade, Zulu, which was a counter sort of development, probably about in the 1930s. And Zulu tosses out to individual people in the crowd that they know coconuts, and those are the single most coveted prize in Mardi Gras, the coconut from the Zulu parade. Mardi Gras was all male until relatively recently when there were women's parades. It's a great tourist attraction, but again, what it represents is kind of a third world economy and a sort of a plantation mentality and the royalty in terms of class stratification to the poor.
So growing up in Louisiana, what was your first instance of racism?
Well, I'm white, and so my racism hasn't been really pernicious. The only major example I could point out in what we call individual racism, an act of one person against another, was when I was, I guess, 12, and I was a ping pong champion, and someone etched a Nazi swat sticker into my foam paddle to destroy the paddle, and that was a sort of a really mean-spirited thing to do. But when I think of racism, I think of the serious racism, which we call institutional or structural or systemic racism. And the example I like to discuss is my first major experience with that. And again, as I mentioned, my first full-time job was at the University of Southern Mississippi in 1970, full-time professor of political science. When I got to Southern Miss, I realized that the mascot of the university was General Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was a general during the Civil War for the Confederacy and was a founder and first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, which he founded in 1867. And someone dressed up as General Forrest at football games and marched around the field on a horse. So I sort of investigated Southern Miss, and I found out that the first African-American who attempted to enroll, a man named Clyde Kennard, was murdered in a heinous conspiracy involving the president of the university and the governor of the state of Mississippi. This was back September 15th, 1959. There's now a book out about that, The Life and Times of Clyde Kennard. And I first wrote about Kennard in a chapter of my book called Exit 13, Oppression and Racism in Academia, that was published in 1982 by South End Press of Boston, in a chapter called The Killing of Clyde Kennard. So Kennard was a paratrooper in the Korean War, and he had finished 3 years of college at the University of Chicago, meritoriously, and he came back to Hattiesburg to run his mother's chicken farm. And the university was located 15 minutes from his house, so he decided that he wanted to try and enroll. And when he tried to enroll in the university, he just told the president he was going to come, and he had the interview. And when he left, he was arrested allegedly for reckless driving. He went down to the police station. The police drove his car, and when he got to the police station, the police said that there was a sack of 5 bottles of alcohol, of whiskey, which was illegal in Mississippi at that time. And so he was further charged with that, and his attempt to enroll was turned down. However, he could still reapply. And so the state decided to turn Kennard into a felon. And so one day there was a burglary at the Forest County Cooperative warehouse. The person who did the stealing was a 19-year-old black, and he sold the grain to Kennard. Kennard didn't know it was stolen. He was arrested, and he was charged with accessory to burglary. If he had been guilty of $25 worth of chicken food, there would be no more than about a 90-day sentence. But because everyone knew who Clyde Kennard was, he was sentenced to a 7-year term of hard labor in the state penitentiary at Parchment. Things went well at first until Kennard developed cancer. And when he did, they decided that they were going to just do him in. They put him into the hardest labor gang, the sun up to sundown gang. He was hemorrhaging. He had to crawl back into the prison every day. And when he was just about on his deathbed, a group of several civil rights leaders, Martin Luther King Jr. and Dick Gregory and others, went to the governor, and the governor decided to release Kennard because they didn't want to have Kennard on their hands when he died. Kennard went back to Chicago, and he underwent an 8-hour operation, but then he still died. On his deathbed, Kennard said that, quote, "What they did to me was not nearly as bad as what they did to the guard. They turned him into a beast, and they'll surely turn his children into that." And so he asked Joan Howard Griffin, who was interviewing him, who wrote the famous book Black Like Me, to tell his story so that people would know about it. I've been telling this story about Clyde Kennard since 1971.
As a philosophy professor, why do you think philosophy is getting taken out of the college curriculum?
Thank you. It's a good question, especially today, in fact. Well, I think the problem is that philosophy, from the point of view of the elites, can threaten their power and control because it teaches people critical thinking. So that's the last thing that they want people to do. They want people to just be obedient, follow rules, and not ask questions like, why? Why is this the case? Perhaps the most important book about the power elites is a book called The Power Elite, published in 1956 by C. Wright Mills. And C. Wright Mills says that there are 3 institutions that control America: the military, the government, and corporate America. And what they want to do is not have you ask any questions. The military wants permanent wars, it so seems. The government just lies to us and doesn't want us to critically think about that. Think about the fact when Secretary of State Colin Powell doctored photographs before the United Nations to indicate that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, and we all just went along. No one really questioned that. But it's particularly the case with corporate America. Corporate America doesn't want us to ask annoying questions like second opinions from doctors who just give us opioids. I'm a big sports fan, but sports has turned into sports gambling and not much else of anything else. So it's in the interest of particularly politicians like the current sort of administration to divide us up and not allow us to see common interests. And that way they can get away with running through their program. The most unfortunate aspect of American politics, going back to, say, when African Americans got the right to vote in theory in 1865, is that there's a natural alliance between low-income whites and blacks to vote along economic lines to improve their position, to have some programs to benefit people in low-income positions. What has been the predominant theme in American history, as W.B. Du Bois said in his 1901 book, is racism. He said it's the 20th century. He said in 1901 that the issue of the 20th century is going to be the color line. And so again, if we were able to develop our critical capacities, that wouldn't happen. Just add one more thing. You mentioned philosophy, but doing away with philosophy departments in colleges is just the tip of the iceberg. Schools today, for the most part, don't teach novels. You don't read a whole book. They don't want people to be able to identify with people from other countries, to have empathy and that sort of thing that you might get from reading novels. So instead, they just have a few passages from a book, and you take a bubble multiple choice test on what's the theme of the book. You don't get to read the book. Finally, libraries and librarians basically don't exist. According to Jonathan Kosol's current book, The End of Equality, there are 2 librarians for 50,000 students in Detroit public schools today. So philosophy is just the most obvious example of denying us critical thinking capabilities.
What do you want American citizens to know more than anything? What is your prediction for the next 10 to 15 years?
Well, as you pose it, citizens, I guess I'll focus on a little bit, at least, on government. I want Americans to be educated fully enough to be effective, competent participants in the political process, which they are not. It's sort of similar to your last question. On the tombstone of Thomas Jefferson are listed only 2 things, that he wrote the Declaration of Independence and he founded the University of Virginia. The reason for that is that shows you the connection between being educated, being able to make capable decisions, and functioning in a democracy. And so I would like people to be highly educated, but educated with humane liberal arts backgrounds in the courses of like philosophy and literature that we started taking away. I would like people to find a way to be anti-racist. I suggest to white people they join a black church. I also suggest that they stop listening to the 11 o'clock news, which is basically always to sell products about black crime. And so I think we need to get competent. But our politics should be more than just voting. Frederick Douglass said, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and never will." And so I think Americans should become agents for social and political change. They can do that, and it's just a matter of, working hard at learning about things. If I had an additional agenda away from politics, I guess I would recommend that people not only take care of their minds, but from a young age take care of their bodies. I'm a long distance runner. Even at 82, I'm nationally competitive, and I think that people from a young age should do an aerobic exercise. Running is perhaps the best, but dancing is fine. Anything you can do is fine. What you don't understand is that you got to invest for the rest of your life. You need to invest in education so you can make a decent living. You need to invest in good health care so you can live a long, wonderful life. And if I guess I had a third area that you should engage in self-improvement, it would probably be financial literacy. So many people just squander whatever they have away. You should understand the nature of comparative shopping, for example, and you should learn how to invest what little you have. I frankly recommend people live beneath their means, not beyond their means. You don't impress people. People are envious of what you have rather than happy for you, oftentimes.
On the track is currently on, what do you predict America will be?
Oh, gosh. I don't think I'll be here to see that. But the main point is, I don't think we can predict it. I'm not an optimist, but by nature. I guess it somewhat goes back to what I said a few minutes ago. We in terms of the political system, and that matters because they have set us up with a $37 trillion debt for you asked about the future, and your children and your grandchildren. The war right now in Iraq is costing us just under, what is it now, just under $1 billion a day, $890 million a day. Where's this money coming from? It comes from borrowing money. What happens when you borrow money? That means you have a debt. You don't have to pay the full amount off, the principal, but you have to pay the interest on it. We are now spending our national budget virtually more money on interest on the debt than everything else combined. And so the future depends upon shifting the priorities of government from military and prisons to the needs of the people. To do that, we need an educated public. To do that, we need, so the point is, it all, is a sort of a cumulative impact in a negative way as things decline, or a positive way as things improve. We need to stop the decline right now. People are suffering. And I'm only speaking in the United States because you asked about this country. The rest of the world is in general, much worse off. You look at the price of gas in the U.S. and you look at it in Europe, it's basically more than double in Europe. So we need to start somewhere.
Why do you start every class defining what's on a penny? Can you showcase the meaning?
Sure. If you look at any coin, this is a quarter, it has the word liberty on the front. And if you look at the back, it has the Latin word e publius unum. I start my classes with raising the two questions: who controls schools and for what purposes? It's sort of a question of, do the people control government or do elites control government? In terms of education, and so again, that's the flip of the coin. I use the word e publius unum to mean unity or order. By order, I mean the status quo, maintaining the status quo as it is. The elites benefit, the wealthy, the privileged benefit from the way things are. The courses I'm teaching are in education, and the question of the elite control or the people's control relates to the question of, do we have equal educational opportunity in our public school system? Or on the other hand, do schools reproduce existing race, class, and gender inequalities? And so the coin sort of shows you, you can flip it, and it's a sort of a contested fight between who's going to win the battle. Traditionalists, conservatives say American schools provide equal education opportunity. We rise or fall on the basis of our ability and our hard work. A group of people we call critical theorists believe that that's not the case. Schools reproduce inequalities, and they do it through educational practices which result in unequal opportunity, such as the way we fund schools, such as segregation of schools, such as curricula which are divided for the wealthy into college prep and high school or vocational education. Discipline problems in schools which disproportionately hurt low-income and students of color. So all of these practices result in unequal opportunity. In other words, the order side prevails over the liberty side. But it's up to us, again, through politics, to decide who wins out. It's just a cute little convention to have you see the battleground.
Yeah. What do you know about Freemasonry and its ties to the development of the United States?
Well, Masons really means stonemasons. The stonemasons were the people who built the cathedrals and the castles in the world. And they had specialized knowledge. And they were really became a kind of an elite class. And their first lodge that they had to meet in was in London in 1717. By the time of the founding of our country, the Masons had a lot of influence in government. As a matter of fact, George Washington was a Mason, Benjamin Franklin was a Mason. Many of the signers of the Declaration of Independence and of the Constitution were Masons. 1/3 of all American presidents, 14 out of whatever the number is, 46 today, I believe, have been Masons. Most recently, Gerald Ford, Harry Truman, both Roosevelts, Andrew Jackson, and so on. So Masons were powerful. A good example of this is the $1 bill. And I just recently found this out. If you look at the back of the $1 bill, on the right-hand side is the American eagle. On the left-hand side is a pyramid with a little eye above it, a sort of a human eye. It's the Mason symbol of the eye of God guiding down and watching down over humanity. Now, the Masons had a great deal of power, even by virtue of putting this on the $1 bill. Their power waned when they became somewhat in opposition to Catholics, because they felt Catholics were controlled by a foreign leader, the Pope. They had always opposed royalty, and they were, of course, and still are, an all-male group. It's sort of a masculine response to some of the perceived more feminine Christian evangelical movements of the 1830s. So they sort of waned in power from the power that they once did have in American politics. Today we think of the Masons, and my father was a Mason for that matter, as being associated with the Shriners. And the Shriners have a good public image because of the Shriners' healthcare programs, the Shriners' hospitals, and charities.
When did Detroit decline, and has it gotten better from your perspective?
Yeah, good question. If you go back to 1950, Detroit was the fourth largest city in the country, behind only New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. It had 1.85 million people. It was 83% white, and it had an excellent public school system. Most people attribute the turning point of Detroit, of course, to the July 1967 insurrections or riots. And it is true that was a pretty grim experience. 43 people died or were killed. 2,000 buildings were destroyed. 7,200 people were arrested. So it was pretty awful. The result of that was a white flight or white exodus to the suburbs and a deindustrialization of Detroit. It also coincided with the competition from German and particularly Japanese cars. I guess the bottom was hit with the bankruptcy of 2013, when Detroit, that was the largest municipal bankruptcy ever, and at that time there was almost no response time for emergency services in Detroit. 40% of street lights were out. There was almost no snow removal, abandoned buildings, and it was pretty awful. You ask how Detroit is today. Detroit is overall a lot better in terms of these topics I just talked about in the central business district today. But most of the revitalization has been just there. It's been in downtown Detroit. It's been in the riverfront, boutiques and Woodward Avenue. White gentrification, rents are sky high. So for some whites and business people, it's been an improvement. Police are doing a much better job. Crime is down dramatically. However, for where most people live in Detroit in the neighborhoods, conditions are no better than they ever were. As a matter of fact, if you look at the measures of the most challenging problems that cities have, and on the seven major matrices, Detroit is dead last, and the only one that's only second to last on is racial segregation. But on all these other measures, Detroit is not only last, but it's way, way, way worse than the second to lowest. I'm talking about violent crime, poverty rate, unemployment rate, percentage of adults with asthma, vacancy rates, and loss of population. These are current data. So we got a heck of a long ways to go for Detroit to get back to where we'd like it to be.
With the recent passing of Jesse Jackson, did you have any relationships with any notable figures within the civil rights era or
people? In terms of famous people, the one person I'll mention, just because I've got this photograph of me, is President Gerald Ford. This is in 1977. I was teaching at the Black College in New Orleans, and I had the honor of introducing him. And I'm proud of the fact that if you can see the picture close up, I made him laugh because I made a joke about a football game of Michigan and Ohio State that was going to be played that week. But in terms of civil rights people, I was a good friend of the first black mayor of New Orleans, Dutch Morial, and a good friend of his son, Mark Morial, who is mayor, also of two-term mayor, and is now president of the National Urban League. I've met Reverend Jesse Jackson and talked to him. I've met John Lewis and talked to him. In terms of other famous people, not in the civil rights movement per se, although in some ways they really were, but they're white. I didn't know him personally, but in 1964 I was in a small dining room with President Lyndon Johnson as a Johnson supporter. In 1967 I was in a small Senate hearing room with Bobby Kennedy. I was writing my dissertation at that time. I met a bunch of senators, interviewing them. The most famous one was Sam Ervin, who became the chair of the Senate Watergate Committee. And I spent 2 days with someone named Albie Sachs, who's not well known. He's still alive today, but at the time that I knew him in 1980, he was becoming about the most famous jurist in the world. He was appointed by Nelson Mandela to be a member of the original charter constitutional court in South Africa. In terms of celebrities, I guess my favorite story is that in 1969 I was in D.C. doing research and heard about a singer who was becoming known around town, and I heard her in a very small bar called Mr. Henry's, and Her name was Roberta Flack, and this is before she cut an album. But I heard her sing The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face. And so I sort of feel like I discovered Roberta Flack.
So what is your thoughts on the school-to-prison pipeline?
Well, real quickly, the school-to-prison pipeline refers to the disproportionate incarceration of youth of color, particularly African Americans, because of these draconian school punitive policies of discipline that we began about 30 years ago with zero tolerance and school resource officers. Well, African American youth constitute 15% of the high school population and 50% of those who are incarcerated from high schools, which is staggering. The way that happens is that you get suspended or expelled from school. And African Americans are expelled at a 4 times greater rate than whites, African American females at a 6 times greater rate than white females. And they get suspended for minor, petty offenses that are really subjective and judgmental, like, quote, disrespect of the teacher, or maybe being slightly tardy. For whites to be expelled from school or suspended from school, they have to commit major crimes like possession of drugs or smoking or a weapon and that sort of a thing. And so it's, the point is, once you get suspended, you lose contact with the school system, the structure and so on. It's a short step to dropping out of school. Once you drop out of school, you're 8 times more likely to be incarcerated than if you graduate from school. I really consider the school-to-prison pipeline to be a modern-day version of slavery. It's really, in many ways, exactly the same. After slavery ended, we had semi-slavery in terms of sharecroppers who were in permanent debt because of the costs that the plantation owner required them to pay for their land and for their supplies and so on. Then they were often arrested for false charges, like Clyde Kennard was, of vagrancy. And then they ended on programs in which they were leased out, convict leasing programs, which was slave labor. Not to mention the 1 out of 6 days, every 6 days, someone in America was lynched, almost all black, between 1880 and 1930. So this is just the modern day version of that. You look at the states that still have corporal punishment in schools, and they're mostly in the South, mostly the same states that had slavery. School-to-prison pipeline gives free, cheap labor to prisons. And finally, many of these prisons have been privatized, which means that whites have an interest in having more prisoners because the stock prices will go up. They have more participants in their prison system. It's sort of part of an answer to the question about how I foresee the future 15 years from now. We better start doing away with that injustice.
Do you ever think the funding for school, the disparity will ever change ever since Brown versus Board of Education with desegregation? Schools are still segregated pretty much in 2026, and the property tax is still disproportionately provided to schools who need the most help.
Well, the way we fund schools in every state except for Michigan since 1994 is a local property tax. And the local property tax depends upon the value of the property, houses, and businesses in that area. So this means that the quality of education a person's going to get basically depends upon the wealth of their parents who live in a community that has higher property taxes. If you look at, let's use Michigan, for example. Let's use southeastern Michigan, and there are 98 school districts there. And we look at, we rank them 1 to 98 in terms of standardized test scores. And we compare that to where they are in terms of funding in schools. It's exactly the same order correlation. And it's exactly the same order correlation as the wealth of their parents. Socioeconomic status based upon income, occupation, and education. And in short, the way we fund schools in America simply accounts for intergenerational upward, cumulative stratification in a positive way if you're rich, and in a negative way, poverty makes for more entrenched poverty for the next generation. We have to break that by funding schools not by the property tax. Every other country in the world, and I guess it's a good way to sort of end this, is to say that we talk about American exceptionalism, and we use that as a concept in which we say America does things differently and better than all other countries. We do things differently, but in most of those instances, it's the wrong way, it's a bad way. We're the only country that funds schools by the local property tax. We have 4% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prisoners, and so on. So we have to change fundamentally and sort of radically the way we do things. And that's not going to happen unless people become informed. And I always tell my students, who are largely teachers, are going to be teachers, or principals, or superintendents, that it's your job to educate people to the truth. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. But I guess I want to always end on a note of hope and promise. As Rosa Parks says, keep on keeping on. As Jesse Jackson said, keep hope alive. There's always hope, and we just have to, through whatever effort we can obtain collectively, through unions, through voting, through protest politics, and so on, to take government back and take power back in all our institutions and undo the institutional racism and have it be people power. Everyone has a place, a role in the people's movement to make things right again in America.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.